one of the things that I realized was, there's a big difference between what I had experienced and what some of you might have experienced. Me being the ripe old age of 30, I was a freshman at Western Connecticut State University. I had a class that day. I'd been in the Marine Corps for a year, and I had no thoughts of anything going on. It was just a normal day. Obviously, that changed, and I know for a lot of you, it might have been a little bit different. Most of you were probably under 10 years old, if you're a freshman, maybe a sophomore. And there's a big dynamic change between what I might have experienced and what you did. Feelings of confusion. Why are people acting differently? What's happening? Why are people upset? And also the feeling of why would somebody do this to us? What did we do? A lot of people don't really understand what the dynamic was that created all of this, but we definitely remember what had happened on that day. For me personally, I still think about it. I think about people in the burning buildings jumping to their death. I think about young people that would go into the burning buildings. That takes courage that you just can't even imagine. 343 of them obviously perished. 1,700 people from the World Trade Center still haven't been identified. Just to give you an idea of the destruction that occurred. And some of the thoughts of just the horror of what they must have gone through. The fact that somebody could inflict that kind of pain onto our own country. It was a completely different paradigm. September 10th, 2001, and September 11th, for sure. And the world just changed. There's always that question: are we safe? Is something going to happen again? What should I be ready for? And that's a dynamic that growing up I didn't have to deal with, that a lot of you had. And I just remember wondering what to do. Should I go down to New York City? I've got basic plans that are trying to, should I go? Am I going to be getting called to go, overseas? What's happening? It's just a very big feeling of unease, uncertainty. You really don't have an idea of what to expect next, and that changes the way you think and the way that you act. For sure. But I remember the call to action that we had right after 9/11, and you got to see the nation come together. It wasn't like we have the election now, it's Republican, Democrat, I feel this way. Everybody came together for a very good period of time, and we were unified in our focus. When I'd done research for this speech, I actually reached out to a lot of my friends. I have responses from veterans and friends of mine from 15 different states incorporated. And one of the things that it talked about is the anger, the desire to have vengeance, find these people and make them pay for what they've done. And it's a powerful emotion, and for me personally, almost bordering hate. It's a strong word, but it was an action that was never seen in this country before. And then we had the call to arms. And then we started obviously operations in Afghanistan first, Iraq going forward. And we had 6,700 of our own citizens perish protecting our freedoms. Our ability to go to class and know that somebody's not going to blow up the building next door. And that's something that you saw overseas. You can ask a lot of veterans what it feels like to be mortared every single day. Have rockets fired at you, sniper rounds, even a mortar round literally hitting a porta-john 30 feet away from you. Having friends of yours get hit, having to medevac them out, dealing with things that you just might not understand if you hadn't been over there. And there's also the interesting feeling of this is the enemy, but we have to render aid. That might be controversial, but that's something that I had to deal with. Do I medevac this guy that was just shooting the person that we're trying to save? And those are things that, 23 years old, you're not prepared for. But it's something that you have to make that decision. In my job, I did battle space management. One of my jobs was to obviously help the operations, but to save our people. In Fallujah, we had to medevac over 750 people instantly, or they would have died. We saved about 90% of it. But you still think about the people that put it. And, you know, it hurts to think about it to this day. But the one thing that I've seen over the last couple of years is an evolution of the feelings that you have. You know, up until about 2007 or so, I was just angry. You know, if I could have just taken my M4 and gone over on my own, I would have taken care of business. You know, but then I started to understand, like Dr. Corbin talked about, what caused the issue. And education is really the key for this fight. We have to understand what makes them feel that way and how they get that way so that we can change their feeling towards us. And this isn't something I know everyone talks about, oh, the war in Iraq is done, Afghanistan is done. It's not going to end until we can educate them and show them what we are, and they can have an understanding of us. You know, so I challenge all of you to begin to educate yourself on what the real issues are. It might not seem important now, but you should understand what caused the problems that we have today, so that we can prevent something like World Trade Center from happening in the future. Education is honestly our only defense against that happening again.